Hey guys, it's Steve here from CG Geek with another exciting Blender tutorial. In this tutorial we'll be creating some realistic mountains, like a flyover that you might see in a Lord of the Rings movie. So about 6 years ago when I first created this channel, I posted this mountain flyover, and at the time I thought it was pretty cool and I was pretty impressed with it. But obviously now, 6 years later, now that I've gotten a lot better at Blender, I can see how not good it was. And now that Blender's gotten a whole lot better and I've improved myself, and 100 tutorials later on my channel, I'm here to give you guys a new video on how to create a realistic mountain flyover just like this one. So before I get into the tutorial, if you want to download the finished mountain scene you see right here, you can do this for just $3 over on my Patreon page. You're also supporting me and keeping me going for more tutorials. So if you want to skip the tutorial and just jump to the finished scene, you can do that for just $3 and do whatever you want with this scene then. And you also get access to all the other tutorial files on my channel. So if there's something you saw and you want it, for just $3 you can go over there and download it. Okay, so now on to the tutorial. Okay, so first off, you're going to want to download the beta version for Blender 2.8. You can do that following the link in the description at blender.builder.org. Go ahead and download and install that, and then you'll be ready to follow along because we'll be using some of the new features in the upcoming version of Blender. So with that installed, you can go ahead and open Blender. And first, we're going to enable the Landscape Generator add-on. Now, I know I've used this add-on in the past, but it's gotten some recent updates, and it's very capable of creating really great looking landscape. So go ahead and go to User Preferences, Add-ons, and just start typing out Landscape here, and you'll see the add-on there. You want to check the box to enable it, and you're ready to go. So my goal with this tutorial was to make it completely free for anyone to follow. There's some really good paid software out there as well, but I didn't want to have to charge anything for you guys to be able to follow this tutorial. I want it to be completely free, and we can do this completely in Blender using its built-in add-ons and get really great results. So now that you've enabled that add-on, you'll have this option here. I'm just going to bring out my toolbar a little bit. And I'm just going to start by deleting the cube here. So I'm going to hit X, delete, and then Shift A and add in a mesh landscape. And there's our little mountain. It's going to grow into a big mountain in a second here. I'm just bringing up our toolbar here. And you can see all the different settings we have now. If you've used this add-on before, you can see that it looks a little different now. They've made some nice improvements to it, and it's pretty nice. So I'm going to start by making this mountain quite a bit bigger, and that's going to be by changing the mesh X and Y. I'm going to start by giving the X about a 14 and the Y about an 18, just so we have a nice kind of wide mountain here. And then I'm going to drop to the bottom here and change the fall off type from X and Y to be just X, so it continues the mountains on both ends of the Y. So I'm not going to be showing you guys exactly what every single setting does because I don't want this video to take too long. I'm just going to kind of show you the settings I use to get some pretty cool looking results. So let's start by changing our noise type. Right now it's at Hero Terrain. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that, but I'm going to go to Slick Rock. I found this gives some really nice results. And now we have to make the height of our mountains a little bit more because we changed the scale. It's not really tall enough anymore, if you get what I'm saying. So I'm going to take the height up a bit here, and you'll see that it kind of starts hitting a plateau. And that's because our maximum is set to just 1. We want to increase this to be more like a 5, so the mountains can continue up higher. Alright, so that's looking okay, but a little bit pointy. And that's because the noise size is too small. We want to increase the noise of this noise to be a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this up to be about, we'll go 4. That's about what I used. And you can see you're getting some cool mountain formations already. And now I'm going to go ahead and give it a little bit more depth. That's looking a little better. And then I'm going to change the size of the scale a little bit. This is not the size of the mesh, but the size of the noise along the X and Y, because I want it to be a little bit bigger on the Y than it is the X. So I'm going to give this about a 2.3. It kind of stretches it out a little bit. And then I'm going to give the X about a 1.6. And that kind of gives us a nicer looking mountain there. You can kind of see it coming together nicely. And you can tweak these settings, like I said, as much as you want to get more of the desired results, but just something that I thought looked pretty good was around here. Alright, so a few more settings we can change, but we're kind of getting down to it. Let me see here. There's different noise patterns you can choose. I think I'm going to stick with Blender, but you can just see, well, that's not exactly one that we want. But some of these will give some different results a little bit. Most of them, not exactly what we're looking for. So I'm just going to stick with Blender. But up here, you can see that we now have all these different presets. If you wanted to experiment with those, instead of creating something more like I'm doing here. And you'll get some cool results with those presets as well. But I like being able to tweak all the settings to get something a little bit more like what I'm looking for. You can kind of tweak the offsets here a little bit too to position your mountains just how you like them. Maybe move them a little bit that way is nice. Okay, and now I'm going to do something with the edge level. So if we kind of go to this point here, I'm moving with my middlemost wheel. If you click away, you will lose your settings. So be careful not to do that because we don't want to select something else and then lose all these settings. These are only here as long as we're modifying the mesh, and then they go away once you're done. So keep that in mind. But yeah, the edge level here, I'm going to give it a little bit more. So just kind of bring that edge up a little bit. And then the fall off along the X, I'm going to increase a little bit just to kind of bring the edges of the mountain up a little bit more. Something like that. Looks pretty good. Okay. And now there's just a few little things you could tweak. Distortion can give you some good results. I'm just going to leave that at 1 for now. And that is about what I set up. Now there's more, like I said, that you can experiment with. You can even try different seeds for different mountains. And most of these aren't exactly what you'll be looking for. But you can definitely get some different mountain shapes that would work well doing this as well. But I'm going to stick with the random seed 0 like I did in the tutorial. Well, not the tutorial, but my project, you could say. And then I'm going to increase the resolution. The resolution is something you want to do last because it's going to make everything take a little bit longer when you start switching through different settings. You have some cool effects here that you can drop in, but again, most of them are things that we don't really need to use. Just some of the new features. But that should do it for the base mesh. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to increase the subdivision to about 256. Now this is going to depend on what your computer can handle. 256 is pretty easy though, and most systems should be able to do that with no problems. But alright, with that set to 256, you can go ahead and click away if you're happy with all of your settings. But remember, this is the last chance you have to tweak things. So you might want to go ahead one more last time and just kind of see if one of these settings does something amazing for you. I think I'm going to leave it at that though, as it looks pretty good as kind of a distant mountain. If you imagine kind of flying over it, you can get some cool looking results. Maybe I can increase the noise scale just a little bit. Well, no, can't really go. I lose too much of the detail if I do that. But you can increase the height a little bit or a little less if you want. Again though, I think 4 is pretty normal looking. So now that I'm happy with that, I'm going to hit tab, and you can see I lose all my settings. So make sure you were happy with them, and then move on. So there is our landscape, and to get on with the tutorial, the next thing is going to be using micro displacements. So that is going to be what we do now. Okay, so to get started with micro displacements, there's a few things we're going to have to do right off the bat, and that is switch to cycles render. And now we're going to choose experimental, just because this may be experimental still. I'm not positive at this point, but it might be. And then we're going to add a subdivision surface modifier to our mesh here. So subdivision surface, and we're going to change it to adaptive. So with that checked, we're going to be using subdivision surface and the micro displacements with adaptive. And then back in your render settings here, if you go to geometry, you can see you have the subdivision rate here. And this is how high quality it's going to be, basically, depending on how close the camera is to the mesh. So it's a really cool feature that I've just been really loving in Blender. So to start, we're going to have to unwrap our mesh. So just go ahead and tab into edit mode, select everything with A, hit U, and choose unwrap. It might take a little bit of time because of the high density of the different vertices in this mesh, but it usually just takes about that long. So with that done, we can go ahead and give it a material. So give it a new cycles material here. And in the displacement settings, this is something that's important, and the micro displacement won't work unless you do this. You want to change the displacement settings here from bump to true. And with that set, we should have micro displacement working when we give it a displacement map. So I'm going to go ahead and split my window here by grabbing the bottom corner and pulling it up. And here we can see we can open up a node editor. So I'm going to choose node editor, and we can see our basic material. I'm going to just leave the diffuse for now. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add an image texture now for our displacement. So go ahead and Shift A, add in texture, image texture. Now this is just a black and white displacement texture that I downloaded, and there'll be a link in the description for you guys to get it as well. It's basically just some white and black values that will represent rocks and work really well in the micro displacement. So with that added, we can go ahead and take the color output and drop it into the displacement. Now technically you'll have some micro displacement working right off the bat just by doing that. But before I get that going, I'm going to set up a texture coordinate node so we can tile this across our mountains a few more times so it's not just one big giant rock. So I'm going to go ahead and go Shift A, input, texture coordinate, drop that in right there. Now I'm going to go Shift A, vector, mapping, drop that in right there. I'm going to take generated. We actually don't even have to worry about UVs because it can be generated for this portion. And then vector into the image texture. Okay, so right now, if I go into rendered view, let me quick change to GPU, we should see the micro displacements at work. It's just going to take a little bit of time to subdivide it up. And you can't really see much, and that's going to be just because it's not very intense. So I'm going to go ahead and add a multiply node, and that will give us some more intensity. So to do that, it's just converter math, drop it in here, change the type to multiply, and then I'm going to change the amount to be about 1.4. Now if I tab twice, it'll update again, and you can see by tessellating the landscape that it's updating. And here we should have some more results as soon as it updates. There you go. You get a little bit of it working. But again, it's happening way too big because we never changed the scale on our mapping node. So on our mapping node, I'm going to go ahead and change the scale to be about 28 by 25. It's about what I went with. And then the Z, I don't know if this makes a difference or not. I do have it set to 12 though, so I'll just set that and we'll see if that makes a difference. So hit tab twice to update the landscape, and we should see the micro displacements across the whole mesh. Here it goes, and there you have it. We have this this texture being tiled across the entire mesh, and it's looking not very good because it's kind of all over the place. Yeah, let me quickly see if this makes a difference. Changing that to 0, tabbing twice to update it. I don't believe this should make a difference, but just to be sure, we'll see if it changes at all. And no, it doesn't really make a difference with the Z there. All right. So with that done, we can move on to the next step, and that is telling Blender where we want the rocks and where we don't want the rocks. So before I do any more work on the materials though, it is a lot easier to kind of see the results you're getting once you kind of set up the lighting a bit. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to go ahead and open up our environment map, HDR, and kind of set up the lighting for our scene just so we can see exactly how things will be looking. So I'm going to delete the default lamp here by hitting X and delete. Then I'm going to go over to my world settings here, and I'm going to go use nodes, and then I'm going to choose color, environment texture right there. I can click open now, and I'm going to use a texture from Greg Zoll. It's on his HDR Haven website. It's an HDR dry field. It's one of his free ones, and is one of my favorites. So I'll give you guys a link in the description to that. And I'm going to use the 8K version, just because that's kind of good middle ground from high quality and not too crazy. So I'm going to click open, And now down in my node settings here, I'm going to click the world settings. So I'm using the world nodes. Let that open there. And here you can see we have our HDR connected to our background, connected to our world output. So again, I need to add in a texture coordinate. So input, texture coordinate, and a vector mapping node just by hitting Shift A twice and grabbing those nodes. This again can be generated and drop it into the HDR there. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and go to rendered view just so I can see where the lighting's coming at and kind of tweak it. Here we go, and there we have it. So right now you can see that the lighting setup is not very good. It's looking pretty flat just because of the direction that the light is shining. And the lighting is so important to give the mountains their the three-dimensional kind of look. And usually mountains have kind of a late sun coming across them just because they don't get much sun, and that's why there's a lot of snow, I guess, maybe. Just an observation. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of tweak the positioning of this HDR to give it a better angle of light. So I'm going to start by dropping the HDR down a bit by increasing the Z axis to be about 0.4. And this just makes it look like a much later afternoon sun. And then I'm going to change some of the rotations. So I found turning the rotation on the X a little bit, tipping it just so it's kind of touching on more of an angle. The light is coming a little sharper angle, going up to about a 0.95. And then rotating it around the Z axis to be about -107 is what I have on my scene. You can start seeing that you get a nice late afternoon sort of sun set on these mountains. I'm just going to go -107. And that's looking pretty good. You can definitely see the displacement looks cool at that angle. And then tweaking the Y a little bit as well, giving it a little bit more of an angle at about 5.7 negative. So we get some nice shadows, and the displacement definitely looks a lot cooler once the lighting is set up. So the lighting is super important to get a nice looking results. Now the next thing you can do is tweak the colors of the HDR. With this, we're going to do with a RGB curves. So just Shift A RGB curves, drop it in there. And you can really get some interesting results by changing the colors of your HDR. So I'm going to drop a point in right there just by left clicking, and then a point up here. And by pulling this down, I'm going to brighten the intensity of the sun just a little bit. Now the reason I'm going to do this is because I want to turn down the intensity of the overall strength so the background and stuff isn't super bright. So I'm going to drop that down to be about a 0.5. And now I'm going to tweak the red, green, and blue channels by clicking red, blue, and green. And I'm going to make it so it's a little bit more of a warm afternoon sun. So I'm going to go ahead and drop 2 more points in like before, but only tweak that one a little bit and tweak this one quite a bit more. So the highlights are more red. This is more for the highlights. This is more for the shadows. So giving a little bit of red, you can see you get a nice sort of pinky afternoon sun, which isn't looking too bad. And now I'm going to go ahead and tweak the green. And the green is not going to be moved much, but maybe just a little bit down, just so we get a little bit more of a pinky look. And then I'm going to go ahead and change the blue. So checking the blue option right there, I'm going to, again, reduce the amount of blue in the highlights just a little bit, so we get a little bit more of the orangey afternoon sun. And you can tweak these then as much as you want, maybe adding another one at the center to give yourself some more control over the kind of the mid-tones there. Something around that looks good though. And we're getting more the desired result we're looking for. Maybe not exactly there yet. You can go ahead and tweak the amount of redness you want, and just until you get kind of the result you're looking for. But something like that should look pretty decent. And before I go any further, I want to kind of set up my color management. So switching over to my color settings here, color management, I'm going to choose the filmic option. Again, this is only here because I'm using the beta version of Blender. So choose the filmic option, and we're going to choose kind of a base contrast here. So choose the base contrast and filmic log, but that is it. That's all we have to really change. and you can see that we get that looking results. All right, cool. This will give us way more control over the highlights and the shadows, so the highlights don't look so blown out when we kind of increase the intensity of them a little bit. So that's looking pretty good, and I feel like we can go ahead and maybe move on a little bit. Go ahead and work on the materials for the mountain now. Okay, so this is when things start getting a little bit more advanced, but don't freak out. Don't freak out and click away from the video right now because, oh no, nodes and they're scary. It's really not that bad. It's pretty simple and it's pretty easy to follow along even if you don't necessarily understand everything. I'm just going to show you guys step by step exactly the nodes I use, and you should be able to follow along very easily. Now what's going to make this even easier is I'm going to go to File, User Preferences, and enable the Node Wrangler add-on. This add-on saves a lot of time by giving us some shortcuts, and it will be helpful along the way. So with our mesh selected, we have our little bit of displacement map here, and I have this set to subtract, but I want that to be multiply. And then let me tab that twice to update that real quick. It should look something like this. 1 second. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm also going to subtract a little bit from this because it kind of sticks out a little bit too much of the mesh, so I have to subtract a little bit to bring portions of it back down. So I'm dropping a subtract node in, and I'm going to go just about a 0.3 right there. Tab twice to update that, and that should look a bit better. Give it a second, and we should see it kind of drop down a little bit. All right. So now we're going to be telling Blender what portions of the mesh we want to be rock and what portions of the mesh we want to be snow. And doing this, we're going to use kind of a clever little node setup. It's basically going to be taking the faces of the mesh that are facing the Z-axis and using those as the points where we want snow and everything else to be the points where we want rock. So if that doesn't make sense, it's okay. You can just follow along and add the nodes in just like I do. But we're going to start by adding the geometry node so we can take the normal factor from it. So go ahead and go input geometry. We'll drop that in right there. And we're going to add in a math node. So vector math. Converter math right there. And then we're going to add a combine X, Y, and Z node. So I'm going to go ahead and converter, combine X, Y, and Z, and drop that in right there. So that's the basics of it. Actually, we have one more node we want to drop in, and that's the separate X, Y, and Z. So right here, converter, separate X, Y, and Z. So this is just kind of drawing what faces are facing the Z-axis pointing faces out of Blender by using these three nodes. And we're just going to connect them like so. The normal goes into the bottom of the math node, and the vector goes into the top. Change the math node type from add over to average. So that's important. Don't forget to do that. Average is right. Okay, sorry about that. It's not a math node. It's a vector math node. So just converter and choose vector math. My bad. You just want to change it to average, and then you can connect the normal to the bottom and the vector to the top, and then connect the vector to the vector and the separate X, Y, Z. And here, if I drop in a color ramp node, so I'm just going to go shift add color ramp, connect the Z-axis to the color ramp here. And if I go control shift, click on that, you can see that the faces that aren't pointing towards the Y, or I mean the Z, are black. Basically everything that's straight up to the Z is white. If I kind of increase this here, pull it in a little tighter, everything when you look straight down at it is pretty white, but from the side you get more black, and that looks great for mountains. So I'm going to go ahead and center my camera back where I had it here a bit, and we can use this to tell Blender which areas of our mesh we want to be black and which areas of the mesh we want to be white. Okay, so with this set up like so, I'm going to, well, first I want to disconnect the displacement here, tab twice, just so that's not putting the black and white everywhere. If this is more flat, you won't see the black along the edges, and you'll just see it on the mountains. so it's going to be a little easier to tell what's mountain, what's not. And I found tweaking these settings a little bit can kind of give you a little bit better results on our X, Y, and Z here. So go ahead and increase this a little bit to kind of tweak the positioning of the mesh. And if you just tweak it a little bit, you can kind of get some, well, that's looking a little bit slim, but you can kind of tweak the amount of rock and not rock. Now this is what I had on mine, but this is looking a little bit slim in my opinion. You can change this from linear to constant, and that might give you a little bit more. And you can see that this is going to be where the rock is, and this is going to be where the snow. And tweaking these settings will basically tell Blender how much we want of each. So just kind of playing around with these settings, that actually looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit more along the Y there, negative Y. And yeah, I think that looks pretty good. All right. So with that set up, I'm not really getting anything. And then you can obviously tweak the amount with the color ramp here as well. So basically just tweak these settings until you get the right amounts of black and white. I think that looks pretty good actually. Increasing the Y or the Z a little bit more. Just kind of gives you the angle you're looking for on your mountains. Maybe a little bit more white in there. Something like that. And we can take this now and tell Blender to only put the displacement in the black areas. And yeah, that's what I'll do now. I'm going to drop in a multiply node after our subtract node here. So color mix RGB. Change it to multiply. Plug this one in the top and this one in the bottom. And if I drop it in there right now, we can see, well, this is going to be the displacement. Okay. And then if I drop this in right there, we should see, if I tab twice to update it, we should have our displacement in the black areas and snow in the white areas. Except you can't, you gotta go Control Shift to click on that, so it goes through our viewer node, of course. And there you have it. Well, we have to turn the factor of the multiply to 1. Sorry about that. That was a noob move. But with that done, we also might have to invert it actually. Yeah, because the black and white, yep. So add in a color, invert. And here we have it. Tab it twice. You can see right now that the displacement is everywhere but the black, and we want it to be just in the black. So with that done, here we go. There you have it. The displacements are in just the black areas and not the white. So that is the start for our mountain. Looking pretty cool. Let's add in some textures. So for the materials, I'm going to be using the new principled shader in Blender to just kind of speed things up, and it works and looks very nicely. So again, using the beta version of Blender, because this won't be there in the other versions, I'm going to delete the diffuse node there, go Shift A, and add in our principled BSDF. All right. So with this node, we can go ahead and just plug our textures into it and don't need to add a glossy node and a any other nodes but the principled pretty much. It just kind of keeps things simpler and looks great. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and go Shift A, add in a texture, image texture, right there. And I'm going to open up a snow texture. This is from cgtextures.com, and I will include the links in the description. But these are really cool because they come with the roughness, the specular, and the bump already. So you can go ahead and just open up your color texture, which is pretty much just white, but we'll just go ahead and do it anyways. Drop that in there, and then I need to go ahead and add in the Shift A vector mapping. Actually, you know what? I can just duplicate these down here. Yeah, I'll just duplicate these. Grab them over here and plug them in. Perfect. And now I'm going to want these to be tiled a bit more. But yeah, we can play with that later. And then let's go ahead and connect this to the material output. Now we'll go ahead and update and put our snow as the white. All right, excellent. So with that that in place. You can see the bump working a little better there. I'm going to go ahead and add in some of the other materials here. First things is we can change our mesh. Whoops, let's kind of drag this down a little bit so we can see it better, to be smooth. And this will kind of just smooth out areas like this where you can kind of see some of the bumps. Whoops, change to smooth shading. That should anyways. Fingers crossed. Okay, I think that might just be the, yeah, that's gone. It's just the displacement, if anything, being low res right now. Alright, so it's going to be much higher quality when we render it. This is just the preview resolution. Alright, so let's go ahead and finish out this principled snow shader by duplicating our image texture here, opening up the roughness. Again, this is connected to the same vector, and this just goes into, you guessed it, the roughness value. So drop that in there, and that'll give it the right amount of roughness, exactly. And then we can go ahead and duplicate that one more time, open up the specular, connect the normal to the normal, and the color to the specular right there on our principled node. So that will just give us the right amount of shine on the snow for to kind of get some of those sparkles and stuff that you would in snow. Now I'm going to use a bump node as well, but I'm not going to use the normal node, just because I was having some weird issues with that when I was trying to use it last time. So I'm just going to use the bump. It ended up looking just as good in my opinion. So I'm just going to duplicate it for the last time, grab that height map there, and I have to plug this now into a vector bump node. So just vector bump right there, connect it to the normal, connect the color to the height, and then the vector to the vector again. And here I can kind of show you guys just how much effect the bump is having by playing around with these settings a little bit. You can see right off the bat it's way too strong, and I'm just going to kind of drop it down to be more like a 0.2. We'll see what that looks. Alright, so dropping this down to about a 0.1 in the strength, and then changing it from color to non-color data. We can do that for all of these but the main color texture, just because it's the proper way to do things. We can also see that the bump might be a little bit too, well, not tiled correctly. And so to do that, we're just going to increase the x-axis here to kind of find exactly how much we need to make it look so it's not tiled. So we'll go ahead and increase that up a bit, and then I'm going to also increase the y a bit. Maybe not quite so much, just a little less. So yeah, something a little bit more on the x, a little less on the y, because that's the shape of our mesh. But something like that it's looking pretty decent. Maybe a little bit higher on the x, just so it doesn't ever look too tiled. All right. So that should do it for our base sort of snow material. The bump might still be a little strong. We can tweak that down a little bit if it's looking too strong, but I'm going to leave it like that for now. And now, just to stay a little bit more organized, I'm going to grab all of these nodes that are our snow nodes by hitting B and grabbing them all, and I'm going to go Control J, and this will just add a nice frame around them, and we can kind of move them out of the way now, and just kind of know right off the bat exactly what these nodes are for. So kind of condense it up a little bit there, and yeah, try and keep things a little bit more organized. Now you can grab the whole frame and move them all as one, and it's just a little bit better for organization. Also, I'm going to be duplicating these, so Shift D, whoops, Control Z. I need to select them all with B and Shift D. And we're going to be tweaking this node frame, you could call it, because it's not a group, to be for the rock now. So for the rock, I'm not going to have a texture for the spec and the roughness, just because I didn't have one for the texture that I used. So I'm going to go ahead and add those separately. I'm just going to delete those out of this frame, and I'm going to choose the rock texture here. So this is just some rocks off of CG textures again that are seamless and look pretty nice. So I'm going to add that, and go ahead then and add in the color mix node to kind of add both these together. So it's just a color. I'm sorry, shader, mix shader. We don't want the color, we want to mix the shaders. And I'm just going to mix both these shaders together with a value of this. And there you can see that the snow is in the wrong spot. So we just want to flip these around. Awesome. We could also just leave it as it was and use the invert node. It works the same both ways. So with that done, you can kind of see our mountains starting to come together, and it's looking pretty nice. One thing is our rocks I think are a little too bright, so I added in a color, brightness and contrast, and just darkened it a little bit, like a 0.08. That was brighter. I want to go minus 0.08, and that gives us just a little more contrast in those rocks. It looks nice. And if we zoom in here, we might see that the rock are a little bit too tight together. So playing around with our mapping node here, we might be able to get a little better results on the rocks. But that looks fairly decent, I think. So we can zoom out on that, and you can right off the bat see that we're getting some pretty cool looking rocks. Now I don't have a separate bump texture, so I'm going to delete that texture and just use a color ramp. So color, or converter, color ramp, and I'm going to use this texture into a color ramp, and if we go Control Shift to kind of look at what it's looking like, we can plug that into the height, and let me quick check here on my other screen, just so I can see what I set up this as. Alright, I'm just going to pull the blacks in a bit, and then I'm going to pull the whites in a bit more. Something like that, just so we have a nice contrast ratio in there. And that should work well in the bump node. Now the strength of this will depend a little bit on what we want, but obviously it'll depend a lot on what we want. But I'm going to increase the distance on this a little bit then, just so you can kind of see the bump in there coming out a little bit more, and the strength. Now this can be a bit stronger than the snow, but you still don't want to go crazy overboard. Something around there though, 0.5. 0.5 is probably good. And like I said, you can tweak the this node as well, but I found that just enough black before things get completely black looks nice. All right, so there's a little bit more realism, and then the last thing I'm going to do is add in another brightness and contrast node here. Connect that up there, and this is going to be for the roughness. Now we're just going to take the contrast down in this a bit and brighten it up a little bit. And if we go Control Shift there, you can see that that's kind of the value we want for the shine. I'm going to go about 0.2, and this can be the roughness. So drop that in there, and that gives it a little bit more specular across the rocks. So that is starting to look like a mountain. If I kind of pan up over this, you can see our mountains, and it's looking pretty sweet. So if I tab twice now, let me quick save this and zoom in a little bit and tab twice. It should be a little higher quality due to me being closer to the mesh when I refreshed it. That's just the micro displacements at work. And there you have it. One other thing is you might want to increase the amount of subtract a little bit more and tab twice to kind of sink the rocks into the mountain a little bit more if they're sticking out too much for your liking. But with that done, yeah, it's looking a little better. It's looking pretty nice. Okay, so moving on to finishing up this material, there's a few things that I did to add a little bit more to this scene, but I don't want to overwhelm you guys with too much, so I'm not going to do all the fine little details, but I will show you a few of the things I did to add even more realism to these mountains. Just some of the cooler things that make a little bit more difference. So first off, I didn't want just the rocks to be displaced. I wanted a few kind of snowy rocks as well. So what I did for that is you can take this color ramp and I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate it. So we have two of them here. And plug this one in here. And this one I'm going to give a little bit less black to. So I'm going to pull the blacks in a bit on this one, like so. And then this is going to be the factor, and it also needs to be inverted. So I'm just going to duplicate the invert node of it. So now if I go here, you'll see that there is some displacement on rocks without the texture, just because the rocks are a little less. So that's kind of cool. I also might want a little bit more rock like up in this mountain edge here. So I'm just going to look at what our RGB node here is looking like and kind of tweak it until I get a little bit more rock up there. So again, you're just going to tweak the X, Y, and Z values here until you get the rock more in the location that you desire. So it's pretty close to what I'm looking for, but not quite. So I'm just going to kind of tweak these values back and forth until I reach the amount of snow and rock that I'm looking for. Okay, gonna pull that down a little bit, tweak that. Yeah, this has to go down because it's just too much rock right now. All right, and a little less on the Z. So I'm pretty close to back where I started, but adding a little bit more on the Y seems okay. And that kind of gives a little bit more up there like I'm looking for. Right there, right about 0.5. Kind of helps. Whoa, my mouse cursor freaked out for a second. All right, so yeah, that's looking maybe okay. It all depends on how it looks when we render it now. So go back to our first node and tab twice, because you need to do that to update the micro displacements. And we should have a little bit more rock up here now. And there we have it. That's kind of a lot of rock, actually. But I mean, it's cool. It all depends on the kind of mountains you're going for. So that might still work if we just tweaked our RGB colors here a little bit then. To reduce the amount of rock a little bit if it's looking like too much. Okay. That's looking a little better maybe. Tab it twice. And we'll put a little bit less rock in that mountain. Let it go. It's updating. And there we have it. So that's, well, maybe a little too little again. But I feel like I could tweak this for a long time. So I don't want to bore you guys. So I'll move on. Maybe just dropping the Z quite a bit. So maybe just do that. And then we can play with our... So what does that look like? Tab twice. And it should be, and there we have it. Quite a bit of rock, but I actually like the way it's looking. It's one more time, so it's getting a little crowded here. We're getting a lot of nodes added in, but I'm just gonna pull this one back a little bit. Shift D. Whoops, I did it again. Gotta select all the nodes inside the frame. Shift D. Shift, just so we can see what this texture is looking like on this principal node. The first one is going to be, let's jump back. It's going to be Snow Rough. Now, again, the textures are from CG Textures, and you can go ahead and download them. But I'm just changing all of these textures out. So this is the roughness node. I'm going to grab the roughness for the rough snow. And this is a specular. So I'm going to grab the specular texture and the bump. So grab the height for the bump. And with that all set, we can see what this material is looking like. We might need to tweak, like the bump, for example, a little bit. Okay, so yeah, that's looking pretty nice, but we can give it a little bit more bump on this node. So I'm gonna go 0.3. And yeah, there you have like a little bit more of the ripples, like small rocks almost. So the idea for this is it's going to be mixed in around the areas where we have snow. So it's like a little rougher snow where there might be pebbles and stuff underneath the snow next to the rocks. I know it's more of a fine detail, but I like to kind of add as much realism as possible. So I found this kind of cool. So to do this, I'm going to need a little bit more room down here. So I'm just going to grab these nodes and pull it down. And both of these, actually I'm going to be using one more color ramp. So I'm going to go ahead and just add that in right now. This one I'm going to change off of constant to linear though. Whoops, linear. So a bit of white or black, it doesn't matter because I can invert it, around the outside here. So between the black and the whites. So to do that, all I have to do, let me quick check my node setup just to make sure I get this right, is, yes, all I have to do is invert this node. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the invert node. and then multiply it back over this node. All right, so I don't need the invert for this portion of it. I'm just going to go Shift A, add in a color mix, change to multiply. Now I don't want to also invert this one, so I'm not going to bother using this invert node. I'm just going to connect this to the top, and I'm going to, well, actually this can be on the bottom. I'm going to connect this one to the top. So if we go to this now, tweaking this node here, pulling it back a little bit, giving it just a bit of white. I can actually change this to ease if that looks nicer, but maybe not necessary. But yeah, just kind of pulling that back a bit, pulling this forward a bit. Actually, I don't want to mess with that right now. Control Z, I don't want to change that. But and changing this to 1, all the way up to 1 on the multiply, we can take a look at what we're getting here. And right now it's completely black, so we need to increase the amount of black, because remember this is inverted. So we need to increase this until we get that. The kind of white outline around the edges of the rock. Something like that will work. You can kind of pull back the amount of this a little bit by changing this just to get the right amount, but something like that, kind of along the edges of the rock, is exactly what I'm looking for. So all you have to do is add one more color ramp, tweak it in a little bit tighter, add the ease to it, invert it, and multiply it back to your original color ramp. And this is going to be the factor for our new rough snow to be added to our scene. So very simple. I'm just going to duplicate our mix shader here. And I'll see if I can put it at the end, but it might not work at the very end. Well, I should actually. So that's going to be the top one. This is going to be the bottom one. All right. And this is going to be the factor. So this is probably one of the more advanced node setups in a tutorial that I've done, but it's just because it's that awesome that it really needs to be a little bit more advanced. Now I believe that's working, but you can't really tell, can you? So I'm just going to disconnect the base color here, make it bright red, and you can see that that is the area that the displacement snow is being added to. So maybe I could use a little bit more, so I could kind of pull this back and give it a little bit more displacement in the areas like that. And you can see it's working in the right locations. So you can go ahead and connect the color, whoops, right there, back to the color, the base color, to add that displacement in there real nicely. All right, so you can see it more like in areas like this. Maybe if I increase the displacement a little bit more, or add a little bit more strength to the displacement, you can see a little bit more I'm talking about. Right around here, you get more of the displacement snow around the bases, and it looks better. So maybe leave that about a 0.5. Pull it out, and there we have it. The materials we can call done at this point. Again, you can tweak them more if you like, but we're going to call it good right there. I want to get on to finishing off the scene with a little bit of rendering and animating. All right, so let's get into some animating. I think the bump strength for this, actually, now that I'm looking at it, might be a little strong still on a rough snow, so I can drop that down to about 0.3, just so it's not too overpowering. And you could also change the X and Y on that a little bit, just to change the pattern up a little bit, so it looks a little bit different than the snow everywhere else. Just kind of adds a little bit more realism to it. But on to the animating. So let's go ahead and set up some camera parameters. I'm going to drop this down. I'm going to select our camera and go to our camera settings. Let's go ahead and change it to be a little wider focal length. Around 30 is good, I found. Let's turn limits on and mist on. And now before I set up anything else, I want to kind of start with what my frame 1 will be on my camera. So you could position your camera with G, but the most fun way to do it is Shift F. And that kind of turns you into first person mode. So you want to go to camera view with 0 on your number pad, and then hit Shift F. And now using WASD and the mouse will allow you to kind of position the camera just like you would in a first person shooter to kind of get the best camera angles possible that you might imagine. So I'm going to kind of follow along. Like I might want the camera, say it's from a helicopter view, space kind of What does that do? Jumps to the area that you're pointing at? Yep. So I'm going to kind of find the area that I want for this, and I'm going to kind of come around this area and just along the mountain edge, like so. Kind of like you saw in the animation in the beginning. So starting around here then, pulling the camera up a little bit higher, and right about there, and pointing downwards a little bit, is where I want to start with the camera. Alright, how do you go down? Just point down, I guess. There you go. So right about that is going to be okay. I can tweak it a little bit more later, but I'm just going to click there and leave it off there. The resolution, you can go ahead and tweak as well. I want it to be a little bit more widescreen, like a Lord of the Rings film. So I'm going to pull it down a little tighter. And I'm going to leave it about 80% because I don't want the render time to be too crazy long. And yeah, that should be okay for frame 1. So I'm going to add a keyframe there by clicking the automatic keyframe insertion, hitting G, kind of positioning my camera the way I like it, and letting go. Now you can see this keyframe on frame 1, and that is the beginning of our animation. So I'm going to be rendering this at 24 frames per second, and I want it to last maybe 6 seconds. So I'm going to scrub down to about 150, which is roughly 6 seconds. And I'll make that the end frame. So I'm going to change the end frame right here to be 150. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit Shift F again and position the camera where I want to be by the time the animation is over. So it's going to be down around here at that point. Now, we'll be adding a few more mountains back there by duplicating our mesh to fill out that area, so you don't have to worry about that. But because of this option being on, it automatically added the keyframe for us. And if we scrub along here, you can see that we have kind of a cool looking flyover. And that looks pretty nice. Now one thing you might notice if I play this through is it starts off slow, ramps up to speed, and then slows down again. And that's just because Blender automatically adds basically the frame blending between keyframes. It's on a curve to kind of smoothen out your animation. But I don't want that for this. So I'm going to go to the graph editor, and you can see that it's nice and curved there, which is nice for some things, but I don't want it. So I'm just going to select all of them and hit V and vector. Now it's going to start off moving and end moving, like it was just taken in the middle of a shot. Very cool. Okay, so with that done, we can kind of fill out our scene with a few more mountains. I can drop this down. Don't need that anymore. I'm going to grab our mountain landscape here, and I want some more mountains in the distance here. So I'm going to hit Shift D, and then G, and Shift Z. So this is going to grab it along the Z axis. You can see it says right there on the lower bottom, locking on the global Z. So I can move it, but it will not move on the Z axis. It will move just along the X and Y. So I'm going to move it back in that direction there. And then I'm going to hit R and rotate along the Z to kind of position the mountains back there. And that looks pretty decent. If I kind of pan around here, you can see that there's some seams issues and stuff, but you don't notice that from the camera because it kind of just drops off there. It could be kind of a hill. And that looks pretty nice. You can see it kind of fills out over here in the corner as well. And it's perfect. Now we might want to add just another bit of landscape in this area here because this looks kind of like a hole. So if you're going to do that, you can go ahead and Shift D it one more time. Grab along the Shift Z so we're only staying on the flat ground and not moving. Position it back there. Maybe we'll rotate it to the back side just so we see some mountains that we haven't seen yet back there. And then grab along the Shift Z and kind of position them back there. Rotate along the Z and call it good. Doesn't look great, but you could drop it down a little lower if you wanted. And yeah, just kind of grab it along the Shift Z till it lines up a little better maybe. I don't know, I feel like this side of the mountains just isn't really working. So I'm going to rotate it back a little bit and just put the corner in there by grabbing the Shift Z and kind of pulling just the corner in there. Alright, and that looks, whoops. And you can see I accidentally added some keyframes because I left this on. If that's happening to you, you want to turn that off and you want to delete your keyframes by hitting Option I on the keyframe of the mesh that you want to delete, and it will snap it back like that. I also have one over here. I'm just going to hit Option I, delete those keyframes. All right, excellent. So this could be actually moved back a little bit more, rotated around the Z a little bit more to kind of fill out this area here, I'm noticing. So I'm just going to kind of position it back there, like so. And if that looks okay in the beginning, which it almost does, almost does, now it does, then that is great. We have some more mountains added back there. All right, so I'm excited to see what this looks like rendered, but first we have a few settings we need to tweak. So we're going to grab our camera, and first off, I'm going to set the distance for the focal length. So with limit set, I'm going to change the distance, and you see that kind of crosshair, that's where the camera will be focused. And focus it just, about 3 is good. And then take the aperture, change it to f-stop, and drop this number down to be something like a 1.84 maybe. Just so we have some nice shallow depth of field. And then with mist enabled, we can go to our node settings here. And under our node layers, we want to choose mist in the pass settings. And then in the world settings, we have our mist pass here. And we're just going to take this and pretty much leave it at default. You could actually bring the start up a little bit higher, right around the focal length point there. And then the end is going to be down here, which is about a good distance. So that is where the mist starts and ends. All right, so I just hit Z there to go to wireframe if you're wondering. But I think we're getting ready to render, guys. Motion blur adds a nice little effect if you can handle it, because it does slow the rendering times down quite a bit. So I'll leave it off for now, but it will help give you some nice motion blur, obviously. And I'm going to go ahead and change a few things here real quick. I'm going to increase my tile size to 256 because I'm using GPU rendering. And I'm going to change the render subdivision rate to be something more like 3. Because the camera is so close to the mountain here that if it's anything lower, it probably won't render on my GPU. So this is a value that you just kind of have to experiment with, and it will depend on your system and what you can handle. But if you're getting render errors, GPU errors, you're going to have to continue to increase this until it fits into your GPU memory. So with that said and done, let's kind of pull the camera back here to a nice render frame right around there maybe. Looks pretty nice. We'll save our file. We'll give it a preview render just by seeing what it looks like rendered in the viewport before actually taking the time to render it out at a nicer sampler rate. And we'll give that a second. It's loading the HDR right now. And there you have it. You have some nice kind of mountain landscapes with the sun kind of pouring across it. And I think it looks pretty cool. You have mountains in the distance there. So that will work. I might want to actually just pull the camera away from the mountains a little bit. So kind of at this point in time, I can add one more keyframe by hitting G and X and just pulling it away from the mountains a little bit. Maybe actually up a little bit as well, just to get a little bit more height on it. Click that button there and then grab it one more time so it adds the keyframe, and we'll uncheck the button. So now we have just a little bit more movement, kind of pulling away from the mountain, like the helicopter driver was like, whoa, getting too close to the mountains there, pull off. And yeah, so it kind of comes away from the mountains a little bit at this point, like so. Maybe rotates up a little bit too, just so you can see like those distant mountains. To update that, I gotta grab that again and then turn it off. All right, very nice. So let's go ahead and render now. It's going to be higher quality because the render preview is at 3. And one more thing is I'm going to use the new denoising feature that's in the Blender beta. And I found it worked really well just on default settings in this scene to take out any noise that you might have in this render and really speed up render times then because you don't need as many samples. So just go ahead and check denoising and see how it works for you. If it works well, great. So with that done, let's go ahead and render. Enough talk. Let's see what we're getting here. Okay, so there's our rendered scene, and it doesn't look too bad, but we're seeing a few errors when we rendered this close to the mountain. So we might want to tweak some of our rock settings a little bit, or just pull the camera away from the mountain a little bit, because you end up with a little bit of issues when you're this close to it. So unless you want to increase your samples and render it, or increase the subdivision rate, you might just want to pull the camera away from it a little bit. Also, I think the depth of field is a little bit too far and a little bit too shallow. So I'm going to take that down to about 2. But yeah, now I'm just going to kind of pull the camera away from the mountains a little bit more here, just because I'm feeling it's a little bit too close. So something like that. Grab a keyframe there, so it's going to add the insert the keyframe. Alright, so it kind of comes around it a little bit more now. And here it can also kind of come away from it a little bit more. Alright. Nice. You can uncheck that now. Alright. And the other thing is going to be tweaking the displacement on this. So I'm going to pull this up real quick. Go to our node editor. And I'm just going to take down the scale here a little bit on the mountains. It's a little bit too much pointiness and a little too few big rocks, basically. So this is going to give it a little bit more size in the rocks by taking that down a bit. Alright, and the negative here, or the subtract node, might need to be a little bit stronger just to kind of bury the rocks a little bit more. But with those settings done, I feel like we could render again. This time, I'm going to add motion blur. There's one other thing that I'll end the tutorial with, showing you guys real quick, and that's the volumetric clouds that you might have noticed. Those add a lot of realism to give it scale and stuff, but again, it really does kill the render time, so if that's important to you, you kind of have to avoid the clouds, but it does add a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and add motion blur, turn the shutter to 1 so we get some nice motion blur, and render one more time. That will add some render time to the render, but it also looks a lot better. So with that done, I'll render one more time. Okay, and here we have it. It's a few issues. Motion blur is still a little strong. I can crank that down even lower. And the composition could be a little bit better, but it's looking pretty good. And I'm going to go ahead and add the compositing to it so you guys can see how to kind of finish off your scene. And then at the end, I'll add how to add the volumetric clouds if you want to add that extra bit of realism that is really cool. So switching to the compositor here, I'm just going to click Use Nodes and Backdrop, and then Control-Shift onto that first node so we can kind of see what we're looking at here. And usually I like to start by adding the mist. So to do this, I'm just going to add a color mix node, mix right there, drop it in. Maybe I should drop this down a bit so we can see this a little bit better. If I hit Option, I can kind of middle mouse wheel position that down there better for you guys. And then I'm going to add in a color or a converter color ramp. Right there. Nope, not right there. Keep that like it was. This is going to be the mist. So if you drop the mist in, you can see right off the bat it looks pretty nice. And so all we have to do is drag that as the factor of our mix node, and then change the color of the mist to be kind of a darker, hazy, slightly orange sort of color. And that looks pretty nice, but we don't want it to be affecting the sky 100%. So to fix that, all we have to do is duplicate our color ramp, connect it to the mist again, go to it, and pull the black value so everything is black but the sky, and then we'll just go color invert so the sky is black, and then all we have to do is to the factor of this color ramp in the mix node, we can multiply this over the top somewhat. So a lot of people are kind of afraid of nodes because they're hairy, literally, and they're all stuck to each other, and they can look complicated, but in reality it's very simple. It's just taking basically taking effects that aren't applied and leaving them in a node that you can always come back and tweak them. So for example, I can pull this back now, and actually, yeah, this has to be in the bottom, of course. Now I can kind of pull back the amount of the sky, and I also can kind of pull the white values up closer so I don't have that sort of edge line there. Right about there. Looks good. And you can tweak the amount you want the sky to be affected now. So yeah, a lot of people are kind of afraid of nodes, but there's really not anything to be afraid of. They're not as scary as they might sound. Drop that into the factor there so we have some sky back. And you can tweak just how much sky you want visible. So yeah, a little bit's good. And that looks Oh, pretty nice. So now I'm just going to do a little bit of color grading to this. First off, in our settings, let's give it a little bit more contrast. So I'm going to go to the color management, change the base contrast to be medium high contrast so we get a little bit more contrast going on. And then I'm going to add in a color balance node. And I'm going to change the color formula to be offset, power, and slope, because this is more the correct way for color correcting without losing your information and colors. And I'm just going to take the slope value and give it kind of a slightly warmish color. And I'm going to take the power value, and this is also going to be slightly warmer, but it works a little different. It's kind of the opposite of what you might expect. So it's actually giving the shadows a bluer color on the other side. It's a little confusing, but it just kind of works the opposite for whatever reason. So now I'm going to go ahead and brighten the highlights, and then again this works the opposite, so going up it darkens it, and kind of darken the shadows a little bit. So that's looking better. Tweaking the amount of sky visible to something like that, and you can also tweak the color of the mist to be something that looks nice. That looks pretty decent. And the last few things is going to be a glare node. So color, where is it? It's the filter actually, glare node. Drop it in there. And right now that's just glares, and you can leave it at glares if you want. They're kind of cool. But I want to choose fog glow and turn the threshold way down until you can kind of see it highlighting some of the edges of the mountains there. Real kind of cool like. Not that far, but right around there looks pretty cool. It kind of helps with the sun a little bit too, adds a little extra glow to the sun back there. And yeah, it just looks kind of nice. So connect that to the composite node. And the last node will be a lens distortion node. So that's under distort, lens distortion. Drop it in there and give it a little bit of dispersion. That kind of gives you a little extra edge blur, and then a little bit of distort as well. And then if we choose fit, it'll kind of crop it in a little bit. So a little bit of lens distortion and a little bit of dispersion. Yeah, dispersion. Looks kind of cool. You can see without and with. That might actually be even a little too strong, but yeah, without and with. Just adds a little bit to the scene. All right, so there is the compositing, guys. I can darken up the shadows a little bit more, I think, here. Something like that. It all depends on, you can do more color grading or less color grading, depending on what kind of scene you're going for. But that is the compositing. So if you want to stop there, you can. Or you can continue for the next 5 minutes and add in some realistic volumetric clouds, which is super cool. So of course you want to stick around for that. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that right now real quick. And again, you can take whatever angle you want on this mountain landscape. I'm just showing you the kind of flyover shot that I did. But I mean, if you wanted to, this is tessellating the landscape real quick here. If you wanted to take just a nice straight on view or whatever, animate this, you certainly could do that as well and get some cool shots. Even better shots possibly, because you see a little bit more errors in the render when you get up too close. So yeah, just some shots around here would be super cool as well. Actually, that just gave me an idea. Maybe I want to quick pull my frame 1 down a little lower, because I do like this angle here. So maybe I'm just going to, yeah, just real quick, double tap G, pull it down here a little bit. Kind of get that edge in there a little bit. All right, click that, and add that keyframe. All right, now I did it. So now it's kind of coming across like that, and that's just kind of sweet. All right, so yeah, like I said, you guys can experiment as much as you want and get cool results with that. But the volumetric clouds. So this is where it gets interesting. I'm going to click on a different layer. Sure, we'll just go to a different layer real quick. Go to front view with notepad 1 and 5 on our keyboard. We'll leave this here for our node editing, and I'll just work up here. And I'm just going to go Shift S, cursor to center, Shift A, and add in a cube. Now I'm going to tab it edit mode and give this cube a real basic shape. So I'm going to extrude it out and extrude out again, and then I'll extrude this up just to give it a little variation. Kind of, this is like the dorkiest looking cloud you'll ever see. But that's the thing with clouds, is they can be as funny looking as you want. Actually, I did not select the face, so I have to do that again. Extrude it out again, and extrude this face out. You might want to click that button there so you can do that. Alright. This button allows you to select vertices that are behind the mesh, and that's what I should have done in the beginning. But yeah, I'm just grabbing these vertices, moving kind of fast just because I don't want to bore you guys, but making a real basic looking cloud-like shape like that, and that'll actually do the trick. So with that done, I'm going to add a modifier, subdivision surface, crank it up a few times, and the levels, and then I'm going to add another modifier. This is going to be just a displacement node. So I'm going to click new displacement, and now if I go to my texture tab here, change it from environment texture to displacement texture, we'll see it's automatically set to image or movie, but we need to change that over to be clouds. And we'll just leave it at that for now. If I tab out of edit mode, you can see what the clouds are doing. I want to make that shape a bit bigger, change it to smooth shading, and yeah, just kind of tweak that a little bit. That's looking perfectly fine though. You can change the strength a little bit more or less if you want to as well. But that actually looks like a decent looking cloud. So I'm going to leave it at that for now. Actually, you might be like, "Holy smokes, that looks bad!" And don't worry, it's not going to be a problem. So I'm going to go new material now, and if I zoom out here to find my material, it's right here. And it's not going to have any sort of diffuse. It's only going to be volume. So I'm going to delete that and go ahead and add in a shader, volume scatter shader. And we'll connect that to the volume. And that's the start of our material. Okay, so with our volume scatter here, we're going to add a few noise textures to the material as well to give it some kind of cloud-like volume lookingness, I guess you could say. So it's going to be just a texture, noise texture. And I'm going to give it just a scale of about 3, and a little bit of detail, and a little bit of distortion as well, because that looks good. And then I'm just going to duplicate this. So we have 2 that are a little bit different. I'll drop this one down to be about a 2, and the detail up a little bit. This is basically the kind of clouds that Blinda Grew has a tutorial on in more depth if you're interested in checking that out. But I'm just doing kind of a basic version of that. And now I'm going to add in a color, brightness, and contrast node. Connect the color to this, and we're going to take the brightness up a little bit and the contrast up a bit more. So about a 0.2 and a 0.16. I'll duplicate this one for the top node as well, and just give it a little bit of variation by making it a little bit different, like so. And now we just have to multiply these together with the color mix, multiply, drop them both in, top and bottom, turn the factor to 1. I'm going to pull this back a little bit so we have a little bit more room. I'm going to add in a converter math multiply. And this is going to be like the intensity, the density, you could say, of the clouds. So the color will go on the top. This will go into the density on our volume scatter. And then this value will decrease and increase the amount of density in our cloud. And the last thing we need to do is position these noise textures on our mesh. To do that, I'm just going to use an input geometry node. And I can just take the position and use this as a vector for both of these. And that's going to be our material setup for our cloud. If I go rendered view, we'll see our cloud shows up right here, and it's nice and kind of fadey. If you want it to be more of a dense cloud, you increase the value here, and you get kind of a cool looking cloud effect. Now you can kind of tweak these nodes if you want to get some different results, more or less, you know, looking clouds. But I found that the settings I had looked pretty nice, so I'll leave it at that. All right, maybe increase the contrast here and decrease the contrast there a little bit. Just two different variations kind of added on top gives it kind of that nice kind of textured look that I think looks pretty decent. Maybe I'll increase the detail down here a little bit more. All right, that looks nice. So now with that that cloud done, I'm going to hit M and move it to layer 1. Now on layer 1, actually, I'll leave it on layer 2, but I'll just turn both the layers on by holding shift. This way I can disable and enable them easy if I want by holding shift and clicking on one or the other. And I'm going to take this cloud and I'm going to duplicate it across our scene multiple ways. So I'm just going to go top view for this and kind of give myself some more room to work. Scale it down a bit, rotate it, and scale it maybe along the Z a little bit. And I'm just going to duplicate this multiple times across my scene. So I'll put one back here, rotate along the Z a little bit, scale it just so they don't look too similar. But they're not very dense, so you really can't tell if they're identical or not. So I'm going to go ahead and just do this across the whole scene, back and forth, adding them wherever I desire. Whoops. All right, put some back here, scale it up a little bit. You can kind of change them a little bit by scaling along the X and Y and Z. Like that's a little bit of a long one back there, which kind of look good in the horizon areas more. And you can scale them up a bit bigger as you get further from the camera as well, because you don't need as much detail in your clouds. And you might want to go to camera view every once in a while, just to make sure that you're kind of positioning them nicely. And I'll rotate this along the Z a little bit, scale it down. Let's put a smaller one up nice and close to the camera so the camera kind of flies through it. That's always cool. Right around there. And I decided that the ones closer to the camera looked better, a little less dense, and the ones further more dense. So to kind of change this, actually first of all we want to increase the render amount on our clouds there too. So before we get too crazy, go ahead and increase the render samples on your clouds. I only increase the view, but you also have to increase the render. So with that done, I'm going to go Materials and click this button here on the clouds closer to it to make it a separate material. And then I can take the multiply down quite a bit on these, so they're not as dense. And so material 3 will be the ones that aren't as dense. So I'll just give that one to the clouds close to the camera. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate a few more clouds here real quick, and I'll get back to you guys once I have them kind of distributed and duplicated across the scene. Okay guys, so I just duplicated about 50 clouds maybe less, maybe 30 across the scene, kind of scaling them in different ways and positioning them to kind of fill out the sky nicely. And like I said, the closer ones to the camera have the material 3, while the more distant ones have the material 2, which is the more dense one. Now before this will work as a render, we need to increase our render samples for transparency passes. So I need to change this to about 64 by 64, the minimum and maximum. This way we can have a lot more overlapping transparent materials like the volumetrics. Otherwise you get some weird render errors. Also change the volume bounces to 1 right there. So with that set though, we have motion blur on and we have the clouds, so the render time will be a little bit longer, but it should look pretty sweet. So with all those set up, I will give this a final render now, and we'll see what it's looking like. Okay, so I just noticed an error where my material 3 was still high on the multiply. I don't know if I messed that up in the recording earlier or not, but I just dropped it down to about 0.4, just in case I had messed it up and did the wrong thing earlier. So the material 4, or 3, which is the closer to the camera clouds, I should really name my stuff, but I'm terrible at that, is a smaller value, and the more distant ones are the material 2, which is the more dense clouds. Alright, so now that I got that covered and out of the way, we'll render again. I'm just dropping down the density a little bit less. Cool. Alright, be right back. Alright, and there's what our render looks like with some volumetric clouds. So pretty cool, especially when they're like in front of the sunlight there. Maybe a little bit more dense than they need to be, but it definitely adds a lot more to the scale of the scene. Makes things look a lot nicer. And we might have to tweak our nodes a little bit now too, that the volumetric clouds are in there. It looks like it's messing with the mist just a little bit, so we might have to kind of tweak some of these values just so you kind of get rid of some of those artifacts. But you can also tweak a little bit of the mist start and end time now. But I'm thinking that looks pretty nice. Also, you can drop in a multiply node vector. Nope, it's a converter math. Converter math. Thank you. Multiply, and kind of control the amount then with this node of how much mist you want and don't want. So I can brighten up the mist a little bit now that we added those clouds. That looks pretty nice. And maybe darken the blacks a little bit more now as well. And there you have it, guys. That is our mountain flyover with the mist and everything. So with the mist, it adds about 5 or 6 times, I would say, to the render time. But it does add a lot, as you can see. Maybe taking a little bit away from the sky some more, because the sky is looking a little. Whoops! I need to tweak this node. That's where it's getting messed up right now. For the black skies back there. There we go. Right about there. Then I can kind of drop it down just behind the mountains a little bit. All right. And this then will again affect the amount that the sky gets missed. But it also needs to be a little bit more on the multiply here. All right. So maybe a little bit more there to kind of mist out those mountains. And then a little bit more here. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. So that is gonna do it, guys. Yeah, I think that's it. All right, so that's gonna do it for me, guys. That is pretty much the finished scene you see there. There's little tweaks that could be done, but all in all, it's not too bad looking. And I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you like this tutorial and learned something from it, I think you learned something from it because there's a lot of things taught here. But if you did, leave a like and let me know that you want more videos like this. Also, like I said at the beginning of the video, if you want to download the finished mountain scene as well as all the other videos that I've done on my tutorial, all the finished scenes in those videos, you can go ahead and do that over on my Patreon page for just $3 a month. And you support me and get access to some pretty cool things. So yeah, check that out if you're interested. But that's going to do it for me. I'll see you guys later in my next video. And keep on blending. Bye. Whoa, bumped my microphone. Poor thing.